Uncle secretly sold his niece's piano because she was not worthy to play expensive music. I came home from school that Friday afternoon, excited to practice the new piece my piano teacher had assigned. I opened the living room door and froze. The grand piano, my pride and joy, was gone. The space where it had stood for years was empty, echoing with an unbearable silence. Dad, I called, my voice trembling. He looked up from the kitchen table, concern written all over his face. Where's the piano? He frowned, confused. I thought you knew. I shook my head. Of course I didn't know. It was just here this morning. Then Aunt Clara walked in, smiling as if nothing were wrong. Oh, honey, I thought you might be relieved, she said. Relief, I stared at her, trying to process the words. Relieved? How can I be relieved? My piano me music, it's gone. She sighed as though explaining to a child. It's just a piano. You've been wasting time on it. You're not really worthy of playing expensive music anyway. Someone else can make better use of it. I felt my chest tighten. You sold it. My voice was barely audible, a mixture of shock and anger. Without asking me, without telling anyone. Clara shrugged lightly as if it were nothing. It's for your own good. You'll understand one day. I didn't understand. How could someone so close betray me like this? My piano wasn't just an instrument. It was my connection to my creativity, my escape, my identity. And now, in one thoughtless act, it had been ripped from my life. Dad placed a steady hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, kiddo. I had no idea she would do something like this. Well, figure this out, I promise. I sank into the couch, feeling the absence of the keys beneath my fingers as if a piece of me had been cut away. The sound of silence was deafening, and I realized this wasn't just about a piano. This was about betrayal, control, and someone trying to decide what I deserved without ever asking me. And I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. I would get my piano back, or at the very least, I would reclaim my music and my voice. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Every corner of the living room reminded me of its absence, the glossy black surface where my hands had danced across the keys, now empty and hollow. I knew I had to find out what really happened. I started by questioning Aunt Clara directly. Who did you sell it to? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger bubbling inside me. She gave me a dismissive smile. Why does it matter? It's gone and you weren't using it properly anyway. Don't dwell on it. That only fueled my determination. I grabbed Dad's laptop and began tracking any local piano shops and online sales. Hours passed, and finally, I spotted a listing for a piano that matched mine perfectly, up for sale at a music store across town. My hands shook as I read the description. It was definitely my piano, the scratches on the side, the little chip on the leg, even the unique engraving on the music stand. Dad came into the room, seeing my pale, determined face. What is it? I found it, I said, pointing at the screen. It's listed at Harlan's music shop. That's my piano. Dad frowned. Then we need to act fast. That piano is yours. We have to get it back before someone else buys it. We called the store immediately, explaining the situation. The manager listened clearly, surprised, and promised to hold the piano while we came in with proof of ownership. I couldn't believe it. My piano was still out there, still salvageable. On the drive over, I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that the piano hadn't vanished forever, and anger at Aunt Clara for taking something that wasn't hers to decide about. I realized this wasn't just about the instrument. It was about respect, trust, and the right to make my own choices. When we finally arrived at the store, I ran my fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar weight beneath them. The sound was pure familiar and comforting. I looked at Dad, a silent promise in my eyes. I would protect my piano, my music, and no one would ever take it from me again. Aunt Clara's betrayal had shaken me, but it had also ignited a determination I hadn't known I had. I wasn't just reclaiming a piano, was reclaiming a piece of myself. After we retrieved the piano from Harlan's music shop, I felt a mix of relief and unresolved anger. The piano was back, its polished black surface gleaming as if nothing had happened, But I knew the real challenge was confronting Aunt Clara. Her betrayal cut deeper than just taking the piano. It was about trust control and the message that she thought I wasn't worthy of my own passion. That evening, I waited until Dad and I were alone with her in the living room. I placed a hand on the piano keys, letting them echo beneath my fingers. "We need to talk," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "About what I already explained why it was necessary." "No," I said, my chest tight with emotion. "You don't get to decide what I'm worthy of. You sold my piano without asking me, without even telling anyone. That's not guidance. That's control. That's betrayal." Dad nodded beside me, his tone firm. "Lisa has every right to pursue her passions and keep her belongings safe. You crossed a line. This is about respect, not just the piano." Aunt Clara's face flushed a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "I was only trying to help," she said defensively. "I thought it would teach you humility." "Humility," I repeated, incredulous. "By taking away something I worked for in love, that's not teaching anything, it's punishing me." "You can't justify controlling my life like that." For a moment, there was silence. I could see her realizing she had underestimated me, that I wasn't going to silently accept her actions. I was no longer a passive child. This was my life, my music, my voice. "I'm going to practice," I said, my fingers hovering over the keys. "And from now on, my piano, my music, and my choices are mine. You don't get to touch them without my permission. Ever." She opened her mouth to protest, but Dad's steady gaze stopped her. "That's final." Sitting at the piano that night, I pressed the keys and let the music pour out. Each note was a statement, a reclaiming of what had been stolen, a refusal to let anyone diminish my passion. Aunt Clara had tried to break me, but instead I had found my strength. And I knew this was only the beginning of taking back everything that was mine, and no one would ever have that power over me again. The days after confronting Aunt Clara were tense, but quieter. She no longer made comments about the piano, and though the air was still thick with unspoken resentment, I felt a small sense of victory. The real work now was not just keeping the piano safe, but reclaiming my confidence and rebuilding my trust in the people around me. I spent hours in my room practicing pieces that Mom had loved and some of my own compositions. The sound of the piano filled the house again, rich and vibrant, a reminder that something stolen could still be reclaimed. Each note was a triumph over fear and over the doubt Aunt Clara had tried to plant in me. One afternoon, Dad came in to check on me. "You've really thrown yourself into this," he said, smiling. "It's good to see you so focused and happy again." I nodded, my fingers still resting on the keys. "It's not just about music anymore. It's about standing up for myself. Aunt Clara tried to take something that mattered to me, but I got it back, and I won't let anyone take my voice again." Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "That's the spirit. This isn't just about the piano, it's about your independence, your ability to protect yourself and your passions. You're learning an important lesson here." That evening, I arranged the music room, carefully placing my compositions in a folder and Mom's favorite sheet music on the stand. It was my sanctuary now, a space where no one could dictate my choices or belittle my worth. I realized that reclaiming the piano had been the first step, but reclaiming my confidence was even more important. When Aunt Clara peeked into the room later, she gave a hesitant smile, as if testing the waters. I didn't look up. My hands moved over the keys, and the music spoke louder than any words could. She couldn't touch this, couldn't influence this. The piano and I were one, and I was in control. For the first time in weeks, I felt unshakable. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that nothing, not even betrayal, could silence me or take away my music. By now, Aunt Clara had retreated into the background, but I knew better than to think the battle was over. Control was something she craved, and I could sense her impatience simmering just beneath the surface. I had to make sure she never had the opportunity to undermine me again. One afternoon, she tried to slip into my music room while I was practicing. "You know," she said, attempting casual, "you spend far too much time on that piano. Maybe you should focus on more practical skills." I didn't pause. My hands hovered over the keys as I said firmly, "This is my piano, my music, and my choice. Nothing practical or otherwise gives anyone the right to take that from me." Do not try it again. Dad, who had been nearby, stepped in quietly but firmly. We've made it very clear. Lisa's choices, her space, and her passions are off limits. Respect that. Aunt Clara's face flushed with irritation, but she didn't argue further. I realized she had underestimated me. I wasn't just standing up for a piano, I was standing up for my identity, my voice, and my right to be taken seriously. Later that evening, I sat alone at the piano, letting the keys hum beneath my fingers. I thought about all the practice sessions I had poured into this instrument, all the songs I had written and learned, and I realized that reclaiming the piano had done more than restore an object. It had restored me. Every note I played reinforced that I was no longer someone to be controlled or dismissed. I had learned that standing my ground wasn't about anger, it was about clarity, conviction, and protecting what mattered most. For the first time since the piano had disappeared, I felt truly empowered. Aunt Clara could no longer define my worth, my passion, or my path. That power was mine, and I wasn't giving it up. Weeks passed, and the house began to settle into a new rhythm. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of the fight I had won. Every time I played, I felt a surge of pride, knowing that nothing and no one could take my music away from me again. Aunt Clara had mostly stopped trying to interfere, though I could still sense her quiet disapproval. But I no longer needed her approval or anyone else to validate my passion. Dad and I continued to strengthen our bond through the piano, sharing stories about Mom and her love for music, and even practicing duets together. Those moments reminded me that music wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline, a way to connect with family, and a part of who I was. One afternoon, while practicing a particularly difficult piece, I realized how far I had come. My confidence had grown, not just in music, but in standing up for myself, setting boundaries, and trusting my own judgment. I could feel Mom's influence in every note, guiding me and reminding me that my voice mattered. Later that evening, Aunt Clara made a passing remark about wasting time on a piano again, but I didn't react. I simply smiled and continued playing. The music filled the room, drowning out her words, and I knew she no longer had power over me. Sitting at the piano that night, I reflected on the journey from the shock of its disappearance to the triumph of reclaiming it and the strength I had discovered along the way. I realized that the piano had given me more than music. It had given me confidence, resilience, and a sense of ownership over my own life. For the first time, I felt complete harmony, not just in the music, but in myself. Aunt Clara's attempt to control me had failed, and I had emerged stronger, more determined, and ready to face anything. The piano wasn't just mine again, it was a part of me, and I would never let it or myself be taken away. The final weeks of the school year brought a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. Aunt Clara kept her distance, and the piano filled the house with life again. I had spent countless hours practicing composing and reconnecting with the music that had always been my safe place. Each note I played was a statement: this was mine and no one could take it away. One evening, Dad and I sat together in the music room, listening to the melody I had been working on for weeks. He smiled, a proud glimmer in his eyes. You've come so far not just with music, but with standing up for yourself. I'm proud of you, I nodded, feeling a swell of emotion. It wasn't just about the piano, I admitted. It was about learning to defend myself, to protect what matters, and to know my own worth. I've realized that nothing anyone says or does can take that away from me unless I let it. The piano gleaming under the soft light seemed to echo my sentiment. Every scratch and chip told the story of what had been taken and reclaimed, each note a testament to perseverance. I ran my fingers across the keys, feeling the familiar resistance and weight, and let the music flow freely. Aunt Clara had tried to control me, belittle me, and steal my passion, but she had failed. I had reclaimed not only my piano, but also my confidence, my voice, and my sense of self. I had turned betrayal into strength and fear into determination. As the final chords lingered in the room, I felt a profound sense of closure. The piano was safe, my music was intact, and I had grown stronger than ever. Mom's influence, my passion, and my resilience had carried me through. And in that moment, I knew no one could ever take my music or my voice away again.